In the beginning of the parsha, Rashi quotes the words Shlach l'cha anoshim, send for your souls men, and he explains Lama nismucha parshas meraglim le parshas Miriam. What is a parsha? The meraglim come right after parshas Miriam. Lefi shelaksa al iskei diba, because Miriam was stricken, she was punished because of iskei diba, because of the conversations and things that she spoke. Shedibra ba'achia, that she spoke about her brother. Urishoyim halalu, and these Rishoyim ro, they saw v'leilakchu musar, and they didn't take a lesson. Says the Rebbe, we need to understand. We discussed already many times that from the actual fact that only in a number of places does Rashi tell us the reason of why certain parshiyas come near each other, that proves that according to the learning and way of pshat, and the simple way of learning the Chumash, which is Rashi's way of explaining in Pirushei ala Torah, so usually there's no question why is it that parshiyas are near each other, and Rashi does not need to explain. Certainly, if the parshiyas are written in chronological order, then there's definitely no need to explain why one follows the other, because that's exactly how they happened. Based on all of this, it's not understood, as Mefarshim in fact ask. The story of the Meraglim, Moshe Rabbeinu sending the Meraglim, happens right after the story of Miriam. It's the very next day, after the 7 days that Miriam was quarantined, that Miriam wasn't able to be in part of the camp, the very next day is the story of the Meraglim. So what's the question that's bothering Rashi? Lama nismucha, why does Parshas Meraglim come right after the story of Miriam? Of course that's when it comes. It's exactly when it happened. The Rebbe says we also need to understand a number of diyukim in Rashi, to mention a few. Number one, the expression lefi shelaksa, she was stricken al iskei diba, because of her getting involved in different conversations and talking. Rashi should have been more specific and clear and should have said she was stricken because of lashon hara. In fact, Rashi uses that very expression in Parsha Shmois. Rashi says, Shelaksa Miriam, Miriam was stricken because of lashon hara. The question is even stronger. A little further, the pasuk, Rashi translates the word diba, and Rashi says that the word diba is an expression of chinuch dvarim, of training, of talk. It's a lashon of conversation, basically. Rashi says, V'yeshna l'toiva diba could be talking for the good, conversations and good things. V'yeshna l'ra, and it could be with a negative connotation. It could mean bad talk. So when Rashi says over here, Shalaksal iskei diba, the word diba itself doesn't even necessarily tell us that there was a sin. On the contrary, it could have even been something positive. So why is Rashi using this expression, Lashon diba? Another question. Why does Rashi add the words, Shedibra ba'achia, because she spoke about her brother? Seemingly what's relevant over here is just the fact that she was stricken because of the things she said. Why is it so relevant over here about whom she was talking? Number three. Why does Rashi say, Urishoyim halalu? Why does he have to elaborate and say, and these Rishoyim saw and they didn't take a lesson, etc.? Rashi could have just said, Bekitzer, Veheim ra'u, they saw and they didn't take a lesson. Why is it relevant over here that we're speaking about these Rishoyim, that we're calling them Rishoyim? We know exactly who we're talking about. We're speaking about the Meraglim. So Rashi could have just said Shehem. Another question that Rebbe asks is on the words Ra'u v'loy lakchu musar. They saw and they didn't take a lesson. Says the Rebbe, why didn't it say, like it does say elsewhere in Chumash, it should have said Ra'u musar v'loy shamaru. They saw the lesson, they saw what happened, and they didn't keep to it. So what's this expression? Ra'u, they saw, v'loy lakchu musar. Another question that Rebbe has is, number 5, why is Rashi in his Dibra Maschil also quoting the words, in addition to the word Shlach, he's also quoting the words L'cha Anoshim? Seemingly it would have been better just to quote the word Shlach, similar to the way Rashi in the beginning of Parshas Baal Loischa, where he's also explaining why the two Parshiyas come near each other. The Parsha in the beginning of Baal Loischa, which is the Parsha of the Menorah, and the Parsha that becomes before that, the Parsha of the Nesiim. Rashi only quotes the word Baal Loischa. It doesn't say Baal Loischa es Aneros. So here Rashi could have also just quoted that first word, Shlach. To understand all of this, says the Rebbe, we'll first preface the question of the Ramban. And the question is, what was really the terrible sin about what the Meraglim have actually done? Their shlichus was to find out, as the pasuk says, Es ha'aretz mahi, what the land is like. What are the people living on the land? What are they like? Are they strong? What are the cities like? Are they fortified, etc.? So what is the terrible sin and the crime that the Meraglim did? Seemingly they came back, they said the truth, exactly what they saw. Az ha'am, the people are very strong, and the cities are very, very strongly fortified, etc. Now, we cannot answer that their sin was the fact that they said the words Eretz oichelos yoshveh, that it's a land that consumes its inhabitants, or the fact that they added their own conclusion and said, Loi nucha lalois, we're not going to be able to go up and conquer this land, ki chazaku mimenu, because they're stronger than us. We can't answer that. Why? Because as the Ramban says, that even before they said these proclamations, already Kalev comes up, gets involved, vayas Kalev esa'am goimer. He quietens everyone down. In other words, there was some problem already with the way they spoke to the people. There was something wrong already, even before they added those words. So even from the words that they already said, Efes ki azam, that the people are strong and that the cities are strong, there seems to be there was already some sort of problem. We're trying to understand what that problem was. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, even when they say their conclusion, loy nucha lalos, that we're not going to be able to go up and conquer, even that could have a limud zchus and not necessarily a sin or a big crime. They didn't say loy nala, we will not go up. They're not saying we're not going to do what Hashem said. Hashem said to go up. They're not saying we're not going to do it. They said loy nucha lalos according to their evaluation of the strength of the people in the land, according to their evaluation of the koiches of the Yidden. They are saying we don't have the ability, al pi teva, to be able to conquer Eretz Yisrael. So again, we're still trying to find out what was so terrible about what they said. Now, we might suggest that what they said, chazaku mimenu, that itself is the problem, because, as Chazal tell us, that chazaku mimenu means that they were saying that kavayochel against Hashem, that as if even Hashem can't manage to help us conquer Eretz Yisrael. But the Rebbe says even this al derech hapshat wouldn't necessarily be kfira in Hashem. Rather, what are they saying? They're saying the nations are so much stronger than the Yidden that we can't even imagine how to deal with them even through miracles. In other words, even miracles have certain limitations the way we usually saw what miracles accomplish. And that's why, what does Kalev answer back? He doesn't say, yes, we will be able to conquer it al pi teva. And he doesn't even say that, yes, Hashem will be able to help us with miracles. He says a bit of an extreme expression. He says, Oloi nale, we will surely go up, which Rashi explains to us as meaning that it means even if we were commanded to go up to Shamayim, even to the heavens, even if we were told to build ladders to climb up to the heavens, we would even be able to be successful in that. In other words, what's Kalev saying? We need to listen to the Eibishter without any cheshbonos. In other words, even if he tells us to go to Eretz Yisrael, even if it's in a way, a kind of miracle that we never ever previously experienced, like going up to the heavens, even then we would be successful. In other words, in summary again, the actual fact that they said we wouldn't be able to go up, all they're saying is, based on previous miracles, even those kind of miracles wouldn't help us. So Kalev is saying, Hashem could do even greater miracles, fine. But we're still not understanding what was so terrible about what they said in their evaluation. It seemed to be they came to the correct, in their mind at least, conclusions. So sin says the Rebbe, the whole point of sending these meraglim was to find out the strength of the people in the land and the land itself, and to prepare for a natural war. And al pi teva, in their evaluation, they said, Loi nucha lalos, we're not going to manage this, and that was true. So we're back to the big question of what was so terrible about their crime that they came along and they said the conclusion of what they had estimated. Says the Rebbe, it is this very question that Rashi is answering by explaining to us Lama Nismacha, why these two parshias of the Meraglim and Miriam are joined together, explaining based on what had happened to Miriam, how she was stricken, and that the smichus of these parshias is going to help us understand what exactly was the problem, what was the chait of the Meraglim. To explain, when Rashi asks Lama Nismacha, why are these two parshias together, as we said before, there seemingly is no problem. Shiluach HaMeraglim actually did happen right after the story with Miriam. What's bothering Rashi is actually the other way. In other words, al pi pshuto shel mikra, sometimes, says the Rebbe, we actually intentionally should put in a pause, a break, a separation between two parshias, even when they do follow each other chronologically. And they should have technically been next to each other. Sometimes, specifically, we should try to separate them. Like Rashi had already explained in the previous parsha, in Ba'aloischa, on the parsha Vayehi ben Soya ha'orein, Rashi explains why are those few psukim of Vayehi ben Soya ha'orein inserted right there in order to interrupt between two very, very negative incidents that happened. So sometimes we specifically put in something to make an interruption. Says the Rebbe, the same thing should have been over here. This is what's bothering Rashi. When we learn these two parshas, the parsha of Miriam and the parsha of the Meraglim, one after the other, both of them are speaking about matters of Lashon Hara. We could come up with a terrible mistake thinking that the Miriam and the Meraglim are chas v'shalom on the same level, or at least in some way close and similar to each other. Now, even though we would right away be able to see, there's a huge difference to the extremes between the results of their sins. By Miriam, so even after she's quarantined and the people don't, so what happens? The people don't travel until she's completely healed. And as Rashi tells us over there, that the Torah actually gives her tremendous, tremendous honor that everyone waited for her. In other words, we see that even after what happened, she's still treated in this way, clearly indicating how great she was. Whereas by the Meraglim, number one, Vayamusu b'Magefa, they themselves die. Number two, all of the doir is going to die in the Midbar. And because of this, number three, their children even are going to have to wander in the Midbar for 40 years. So even though you'd say, no, don't worry about it, no one's going to compare them, we clearly see huge differences. Nevertheless, someone might still think and say that it's not because the Meraglim are such big Rishoyim. It's only that as a result of them not being careful with what they said, so it ended up that all the other Yidden also ended up stumbling and rebelling against Hashem and not wanting to go into Eretz Yisrael, whereas by Miriam, the Lashon Hara was more of a private matter and it didn't impact anyone else. But technically speaking, one might still end up thinking and saying that more or less they both really are on the same level, but one had more of an impact, the other one didn't. In fact, says the Rebbe, that's exactly why Rashi quotes the words in his Dibur HaMaschil. We asked, why does he quote the words in addition to Shlach? He also says, L'cho Anoshim. Because that, it would strengthen even more this mistake that Meraglim are in some way similar to Miriam. How is that? Since the Meraglim were sent L'cho, what does L'cho mean? Rashi tells us, L'daitecha. In other words, it's with the acknowledgement of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's of Moshe Rabbeinu's opinion that they should be sent. He's the one sending them on such an important mission. That itself shows that clearly these Meraglim have incredible qualities. And not just regular Milos, but specifically in this area of this Shlichus. In fact, that's what the word Anoshim means. The Torah refers to them Anoshim, which means, as Rashi says, that Anoshim over here means that they were very choshev, that they were kshedim, they were proper people at this time. So all of this again would lead someone to think that maybe there's some sort of comparison between Miriam and the Meraglim. In order to negate this kind of mistake and to make clear that the Meraglim are in no way similar, chas v'sholem, and on the same level as Miriam, seemingly, this is bothering Rashi, seemingly the Torah should have made an interruption between these two parshas with something else to clearly show that don't compare the two, they're nothing similar to each other. And that's what Rashi is asking, why are we putting Parshas Meraglim together with Parshas Miriam? Comes Rashi and says, why did we put them together? Because she was stricken because of the conversations and the talks that she had, and these Rishonim saw and they didn't take a lesson. That is, Torah put these two poor parshas together in order to tell us another aspect of the tremendous sin of the Meraglim. And this is going to help us answer al derech hapshat why they were punished so badly. And that is because here you Meraglim, you just had an opportunity so close to take a lesson from the story of Miriam, and yet you did not take a lesson from that. The lesson was not in the way that they had to meditate on it, contemplate on it, thinking of a lesson of something that they could have had. Rather, it's something that was there for the taking. It was such an open and obvious lesson. All they needed to do is lakchu musa, just take it. And they didn't. From the fact that they should have taken a lesson from the story of Miriam, that comes along and shows us that the actual sins were somewhat of the same category. Again, different. We said before, there's of course no way we could compare Miriam and the Meraglim. Miriam's a great tzaddikus, and the Meraglim, as Rashi is going to refer to them as Rishoyim. The Rebbe is going to elaborate on that soon. But the things that happened, the things that they did, were somehow in the same category, as the Rebbe will explain. And that's why they should have taken a lesson, and that's what they should have stopped them from doing this sin in order to negate this concept of what happened by Miriam. And this is why we understand now why Rashi adds those words and emphasizes Urishoyim Halalu, which was one of the Rebbe's questions. Why does it have to say Urishoyim Halalu? With this, Rashi is telling us that the comparison between what happened in these two cases is only in regards to the act, to the sin that was done, but not in regards to the people. What is Rashi calling them? Not only sinners, or other similar words, but Rishoyim Halalu, completely the opposite of Miriam, who we just learned that Kavat Chelek Lo Amakim, that Hashem wanted to give her honor. So what's going on over here? So the Rebbe explains in Sivov. Seemingly, we could ask, what actually was the chait of Miriam? The things that she said about Moshe, as the Pasuk says, Oidoisa Isho Hakushis Asher Lokach, about the woman that she had married, as Rashi explains, the beautiful woman that she married, the one with all the qualities, the Ata Gersha, and now he divorced her. Seemingly, all of this was 100% true. Moshe Rabbeinu did divorce her. This caused her pain, etc. So what Miriam said was true. Furthermore, Miriam was not even trying to say something bad about Moshe. Again, Rashi says, Lo niskavna legnusa. She wasn't trying to say something to disgrace him. The only real problem was that she did not evaluate Moshe's level, the qualities of Moshe, in the proper way. In other words, she says like this, did Hashem only speak to Moshe Rabbeinu? Hashem spoke to us as well. So she's making a comparison that she's similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. She didn't understand Moshe Rabbeinu is way, even beyond that level. She thought that Moshe Rabbeinu should have not separated from his wife. So because she didn't understand the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu to its ultimate greatest degree, that's why she deserves such a great punishment. So Rashi explains what her sin was. It wasn't Lashon Hara. It wasn't Dibara. It wasn't about bad talk. The problem was that she was talking. The actual fact that she was involved in talking, in conversing, ba'arichos, elaborating about what Moshe Rabbeinu did, that itself was already the problem. That is, when Miriam sees Moshe acting in a certain way that she does not understand, what should she do? Don't talk about it. Definitely don't talk about it with lots of involvement, even if you're saying just the truth, and even if you don't mean to disgrace him, as I said before. When you start getting involved in all these conversations and talking about Moshe, it's not going to bring to positive talk. It's not going to bring to positive talk. In fact, it can only lead to negative things. And if you really have an issue and you want to understand Moshe Rabbeinu's conduct, then walk over to Moshe Rabbeinu quietly and ask him about it. Says the Rebbe, this is exactly the same thing or similar to this is what happened by the Meraglim. They didn't say lies about Eretz Yisrael, but the conversations they had, the way they talked about it, Iskei Diba, discussing it a lot, conversations about it, discussing it and with so much elaboration, and discussing the strength of all the people living there, and to the extent where it scared the Yidden generally of wanting to go into Eretz Yisrael. If you're really wondering, if you really have a problem how the Eibishter could go to Eretz Yisrael if the people in Eretz Yisrael are so strong, then walk over to Moshe Rabbeinu and ask him about it, or at least just briefly, speak about it. But this whole idea of making conversations and discussing it, and speaking a lot about the strength of the people living there, and with that conclusion, saying, we won't be able to make it, we won't be able to go up. All this could lead to is chas v'sholem, to this rebellion of eventually the Yidden saying, let us appoint a head and return to Mitzrayim. Says the Rebbe in Siv Zayin, how did the taka happen that Miriam spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu? So we understand this from what she said. When she argued and said, Ha'arak ach b'Moshe diber havaya, did Hashem only speak with Moshe Rabbeinu? He spoke with us as well. In other words, since Miriam knows that the Eibishter speaks to her, to Aaron as well, so she did not imagine that Moshe Rabbeinu is so much greater and so much higher than her, to the extent that's going to end up causing pain to this beautiful woman that she married, and she's going to be in pain. This is going to free Moshe Rabbeinu from fulfilling the mitzvah of Hashem, that a man has to have time with his wife, to the extent where he separates from his wife. This is what she couldn't fathom, that he's so much greater. And in a similar way was by the Meraglim. In their minds, what happened was as follows. Since Moshe Rabbeinu chose them al pi Hashem, so in this shlichus, they figure there's definitely no one greater and better than us and understand it better. And since in our eyes, the Meraglim think, we are the shluchim of Hashem. If in our eyes we think and we seem like grasshoppers compared to these people, so they were certain that that itself is also al pi Hashem. That's also obviously the right way. And this is surely al pi Hashem regarding to all Yidden. And therefore they come up with a conclusion from themselves, so the way they feel about it. They're saying this about all the rest of the Yidden as well. Loinu chalalos, there's no way we'll be able to go up. In other words, since in their own minds going to Eretz Yisrael didn't seem to make sense logically, so they were involved in explaining this at great length in way of Diba, speaking all about Eretz Yisrael, and how it's definitely impossible to go. Says the Rebbe now will also understand why Rashi adds the words Dibra bi'achia, which was one of our questions. Why is it relevant that she spoke about her brother? Says the Rebbe, because this adds even more to the idea that the Meraglim didn't take a lesson from Miriam in the way they're supposed to be evaluating someone that is really higher than themselves. What happened by Miriam? By Miriam, part of the sin was what Dibra bi'achia, that she was speaking about her brother. What does that mean? A brother, as the Pasuk again describes in that story, Chatzi Psari is half of his flesh. In other words, we're part of this, we're half of each other. By nature, it's hard to imagine about one's own sibling that's part of yourself, and at the same time to believe, I'm so close to him, and yet he's so much greater than me. And yet, even though Miriam seemingly had a right to think so, and yet she got such a punishment for this, because no, Moshe Rabbeinu is completely removed from that level. How much more so by the Meraglim? The Meraglim definitely shouldn't have thought something even more than this, that all the Yidden, including Moshe and Aaron, have to follow the way they see it, the way they understand it in their decisions. Another diuk, says the Rebbe in this Rashi, is where it says, Rishoim halalu ra'u v'lo lakchu musar. They saw and they didn't take a lesson. Seemingly, this word ro seems to be unnecessary. It seems to be extra. Why doesn't it just say Rishoim halalu? These Rishoim didn't take a lesson. Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this based on, again, a general question of the whole story of the Meraglim. What exactly happened by the Meraglim through visiting Eretz Yisrael? What caused over here this fear of going into Eretz Yisrael suddenly? And to say to the extent, what didn't they know before that now they're suddenly aware of and that's scaring them off? Seemingly all of the things that they saw there, the power of the nation, etc., all of this they knew before. Because, number one, even in Mitzrayim they knew what's going on in the land of Canaan. Number two, in the Shiras Hayam, in Oz Yasher, the Yidden are singing, Namoigu kol yeshvei Canaan, all the people in Canaan are melting away in fear from us. In other words, they know what's going on in Canaan, they know about their strength, because otherwise, what's the big deal that Namoigu, that they're getting all scared and melting away? So clearly they know about the power of what's going on in Canaan, from these examples and more. And yet they were ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. So what suddenly happened when they saw what's happening in Eretz Yisrael? So the Rebbe says, we know the Maimer Chazal that tells us, you can never compare when you just heard about something to actually seeing it. As long as they heard about the strength of the inhabitants of the land, they weren't nispal from the difficulties and they were ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. However, when they see it with their own eyes, ki aza'am, how strong these people are, this had an impact on them that they regret their previous decision that they're ready to go into Eretz Yisrael, and suddenly they're scared off. And that's what we actually see in the story of the Meraglim. They emphasize a number of times. Ro'inu, we saw this, we saw that. And when they're telling all over what they saw, they says, and it also says, Vayar umes priores, they go and they show the people, the Yidden, the fruits of the land. It's all about Re'iyah, what they saw. Says the Rebbe, this is what Rashi is emphasizing. What else did you see? You also just saw the story of Miriam. Rishoim halalu ra'u. You saw this lesson yourself. Since you saw yourself what happened with Miriam, that should have given you the strength to overcome the nisayon of what you saw in the land of Canaan. In other words, like this, if you would have only heard about the punishment of Miriam, so maybe we can demand of you why you didn't take a lesson, because the reason it brought to the sin was what you saw in the land, and you're only hearing about a story that happened with Miriam, so that's Shmiya versus Re'iyah, maybe it's not as powerful. But Rashi is saying, Ra'u, you saw yourself this lesson, and yet you didn't take the lesson. In the final part of the Sicha in Sif Tes, The Rebbe says, from the Inyanim Mufloim, from the amazing ideas that we could take from this Rashi, more in the Chelek Halacha Shebetoira, the Rebbe calls it Lichidudi al Kol Panim. And the Rebbe says, by prefacing first the following question. At the end of the day, how does Torah put the Parsha of Miriam next to the Parsha of the Meraglim, where this could bring out a certain suspicion about Miriam, that in some way she is similar to the Meraglim? As we said before, a person seeing the two things together could make that sort of calculation that there's some sort of comparison to them, between them. Isn't there a mitzvah in the Torah of Yisim Nikiyim Me Hashem Yisrael? We always have to stay in a situation where people are not suspecting us of wrongdoing. Here, by Torah putting these two things together, we're now going to chas v'shalom suspect Miriam being as terrible as the Meraglim. So the Rebbe says, seemingly would be able to answer this based on Rashi's opinion in the Torah. There's a machloikus generally how the Torah was written. There is an opinion that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the whole Torah altogether at the end of the 40 years. But Rashi is of the opinion, like the opinion that says that Megillah Nitna, meaning to say that each section of Torah was written immediately as it happened. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down. According to this, says the Rebbe, it makes sense to say that the beginning of Parsha Shlach, that means everything that happened that day, Chav Sivan, before the Meraglim go off for their 40 days. Rashi wrote it down immediately. In other words, everything that happened now, Moshe Rabbeinu from his part finished his job, Shlach Lecha, he sent the Meraglim, his connection to the Shlichus, he did now, and all of this he wrote down. Moshe Rabbeinu, being such a Zoriz, immediately writes down, because in this way, it won't be delayed, another Parsha and Torah Shebeksav. Now, the Rebbe says it's very, very obvious that every single day in the Midbar, including that day Chav Ches Sivan, which is the day, the 7th day of Miriam's quarantine, and Chav Tes Sivan, the day that the Meraglim are sent off, every single day, many, many, many things happened. We're speaking about 600,000 men, and the similar amount, and women, and children, and elderly, etc., etc. So there's many, many things happening, especially when there is the Yidden travel from one place. They traveled from the place where Miriam was, and now they come and camp in a new place. That means they take apart the Mishkan, they have to set up the Mishkan. So many things are happening. Amongst them, in other words, there's a lot of things that are happening between Miriam being healed and the story of the Meraglim being sent. Between these two things, many things would have happened. So there is the setting up of the Degolim, of the camps, the way they were set up, and setting up the Mishkan. And then the Yidden come and approach Moshe Rabbeinu and ask for the Meraglim to send. The Rebbe says these are thousands and thousands of many details and things that would have gone on between the time that Miriam was cured and sending the Meraglim, including also things of mitzvahs and similar things. As we say, Al Pi Hashem Yisu v'Yachnu, it was based on Hashem that they traveled, based on Hashem they camped. There was karbonis to be brought in the Mishkan, etc., etc. So when we speak about the fact that these two things come together right near each other, it's not that they actually happened one right after the other. There was many things that happened between them. What we are saying, however, is the smichus was that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Parsha of the Meraglim right near the Parsha of Miriam. And it is only from this that the Meraglim should have and could have taken a lesson. In other words, seeing that here Moshe Rabbeinu is putting down this inyan of what just happened to Miriam, and then the very next thing that Moshe Rabbeinu is writing down is this idea the Meraglim are being sent. This itself should give them the indication that they should be taking a lesson from this. And says the Rebbe, it's for this reason that we're sort of almost overlooking or ignoring the fact that by putting in the Parsha, it might give you a little room for suspicion, because it's important to be able to protect the Meraglim, make sure that they don't end up sinning. Says the Rebbe, the question, however, still remains, there's a klal, we never tell a person to do a sin in order that somebody else should benefit, in order that somebody else should merit. So in other words, Sof Kol Sof, there's a problem over here. The Torah is putting in something, a suspicion against Miriam. So the Rebbe says, Rashi is going to answer this question with the words, V'loi lokchu musar, and they didn't take a lesson. Not the Rishoyim halalu chatu, that these Rishoyim actually sinned. We're just speaking about the fact that they didn't take a lesson. How do we understand this? So the Rebbe says like this. This concept that we never tell a person to sin, to benefit somebody else, Rashi explains this in the Gemara. What Rashi says is, we don't tell a person to sin so that your friend, you sin a small thing, so your friend shouldn't get a much harsher punishment. That's what Rashi says. So the question the Rebbe asks is, why doesn't Rashi say we don't tell a person to sin so that the other person should have a merit, shouldn't have a sin, shouldn't be over on an Aveira? Why are we worried about the punishment? Why are we saying we don't tell a person to sin so the other person shouldn't get a bigger punishment? Don't tell a person to sin so the other person shouldn't end up with a bigger Aveira or should end up with a schus. So the Rebbe says that we have an opinion in Tosfos, and the Rebbe says Rashi is agreeing with this opinion, that when we say that a person shouldn't do a sin in order to prevent something else, this is only if the actual sin that the second person has done, it was done already. So we're going to say you don't do a small sin to prevent that guy from getting a bigger punishment. However, if it's a situation that by me doing a small thing, I'm actually going to protect him from not doing a bigger sin, in that case, in certain scenarios, we would actually say, you do something small to protect the other person from something much, much, much more severe. Says the Rebbe, that's what Rashi means when he says in the Gemara over there, Shelo yischayev oynish chamer. We don't tell a person to sin, and that person, the other person will get, in order to save the other person from a bigger punishment. To emphasize the idea that it's only when there was this Isser was done already, and we're trying to make sure he doesn't get the punishment. How does that apply over here? Says the Rebbe, now we can understand why the Torah could put in something in the Torah to put these two parshiyos together, that's going to put Miriam in a certain way, in a certain suspicion by putting these two parshiyos together, because by putting these two parshiyos together, this was trying to help the Meraglim to learn from it and lechatchila not to do a sin. So in this case, we would say, yes, we'll do something that even seems a little bit problematic, but in order to help the Meraglim not to come to the sin from the outset. Says the Rebbe, this is what Rashi is hinting with the words, v'lo yilakchu musar. Meaning to say that the whole purpose of the Ro Musar, the whole reason why you saw what just happened, this lesson that was written down for you, the story of Miriam, was in order to guard you that you lechatchila shouldn't come to the Aveira, and you should end up acting only in the straight and proper way.